And joining me now is leading Palestinian academic Dalal Irikat is with the Arab American University of Palestine in Ramallah. Appreciate your joining us, ma'am. At the very outset, we are getting conflicting figures, ma'am, on the casualties in this attack on the Jabalia refugee camp. Palestinian authorities claiming 400 people have died. Hamas says 50 people have died. Is this now all part of a propaganda war? We're getting conflicting figures on what happened and the death toll.
Well, the propaganda is actually the media outlets that are trying to focus on those tiny bits and pieces. At the first 5 minutes, 100 people were confirmed dead. And they said 300 serious casualties. 5 or 6 hours later, they said 400 dead. So it is not about propaganda. It's not about misleading the audiences. On the contrary, it's about facts. It's about conveying and communicating the truth. 100 were reported death in the first couple of minutes. A couple of hours later, of course, the number of the death toll had risen to 100. So please focus on the truth, focus on the need for a humanitarian ceasefire for the sake of the Palestinian civilians in Gaza, instead of shattering and refocusing the attention into those tiny details. Please focus on the Israeli Hezbollah and their propaganda in misleading the audiences. Whenever they commit any crime, they try to blame the victim, and they try to put the blame on the victim by saying this is Palestinian-friendly fire, for example. We have been suffering from the Israeli military occupation and their atrocities and their war crimes and confiscations and apartheid and racist regimes for so long. We are living in 2023. It's about time we employ wisdom, we employ consciousness, and we see Palestinians as equally human beings.
Ma'am,
once we see the people in Gaza as a human being, I don't think we should be wasting more time arguing on those details, but rather we will all be calling for immediate ceasefire in the name of humanity.
But the fact is, ma'am, Ms. Irikat, this bombing you're seeing it as a war crime, a refugee camp being bombed in this manner. Israel claims it's its right to self-defense, that many of these refugee camps is where Hamas has its commanders located.
What we have seen yesterday is a massacre, a slaughtering all those hundreds of civilians in Jabalia refugee camp. And yes, the repetitive actions of targeting and slaughtering civilians amount to the definition of war crimes under international law. So it's not just my personal intake that what Israel is perpetrating is war crimes. It's by definition what the international law has introduced to us. Israel is committing war crimes against the Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and Israel needs to be held accountable for all those crimes. The fact that we are witnessing children and women being slaughtered and massacred on daily basis for 26 days is something that humanity should not be tolerating. We should be asking for an immediate ceasefire. Yes, Gaza needs immediate humanitarian aid, medicine, food, electricity, water, and fuel. But in the face of all the atrocities and the murders that the civilians are suffering from, I think everybody and all the humanity should be calling for immediate ceasefire. It's not okay that we are witnessing the Israeli state terror being perpetrated on the Palestinian civilians, while everybody is still begging Israel to allow trucks and to allow some humanitarian aid, etc., etc. Diplomacy is not about, just issuing and passing resolutions and then begging the occupier to implement it. Every diplomatic member state of the international communities of the United Nations has an individual obligation, not only in respect of the resolutions, but also to enforce those resolutions and to ensure the protection of civilians and to ensure security and peace for those people.
Ms. Irikat, the Israelis are saying that the refugee camp was being used by Hamas to launch rocket strikes against Israel, that Hamas commanders there are hiding among civilians, and therefore, because it's Hamas that has initiated this phase of the war starting October 7th, or Hamas must be held responsible. Can, therefore, the argument be made that Israel is left with no choice because it wants to finish off Hamas? If Hamas commanders are located in the refugee camps, what does Israel do? That's their argument.
Listen, Israel is trying to mislead the audiences by saying that this is an Israel-Hamas war. This is not against Hamas. They cannot claim that they are eradicating Hamas by targeting and massacring 2 million civilians. They cannot claim that they are targeting Hamas by bombing all those hospitals, mosques, and churches. They cannot claim that Hamas is the target while they are targeting every residential building. 1 million children, civilians live in Gaza. So the fact that Israel is succeeding in manipulating the people's minds is very misleading. Their propaganda and their strategic communication tools, where they had employed every possible tool and they had invested so much money in spinning realities, in distorting the facts. What is happening is genocidal. The Israelis are committing war crimes against the Palestinian people. It is not okay that the world is still arguing whether Hamas is the target or not. We are witnessing the war crimes against the Palestinian civilians.
I will ask you again.
It is not okay for us to see Israel, the biggest, the fifth biggest military state in the world with all its sophistication and military might.
Are you saying that Hamas is not using civilians as human shields? That Hamas is not using civilians, is not hiding, whether it is in hospitals or schools? And this is why these places are also, unfortunately, tragically getting targeted? How can we give Hamas a clean sheet?
Thank you. Let me clarify one thing. The Palestinian people have been occupied for 75 years. The Gazans were besieged for 16 years. But the Israeli occupation did not start with Hamas. Hamas started in 1987. The Israeli occupation existed way before Hamas. Our struggle is under the Israeli military occupation. You know, there is a call. Palestinians have endured so much suffering under the Israeli crimes for 7 decades of apartheid, of killings, of executions, of confiscations, of settler colonial project, and of settler terror recently. The fact that Israel has been committing more and more crimes against the Palestinian people while it enjoys impunity makes the Palestinian people struggle for freedom. Unfortunately, with the help of the media bias, our call for our freedom is labeled like terrorism, unfortunately. It is not a war between Israel and Hamas. The Palestinian people has suffered 75 years, and any conscious, any diplomatic, any legal, any peaceful advocate today must be calling for humanity and for ceasefire, because 2.2 million civilians, mostly women and children in Gaza, are suffering because of the Israeli decision makers, rockets, missiles, and bombs that are being dropped every second as we speak right now. The children and the women are suffering.
Ms. Mislead, you know, the fact is, while a ceasefire and peace is what the world should really want, the fact is, even as we speak, more than 200 Israeli hostages are being held by Hamas. You say there should be a ceasefire, but surely a precondition for that is the hostages' safety is guaranteed and they are released. Hamas cannot keep hostages and then expect a ceasefire to happen overnight.
Listen, what you're suggesting might seem logical for those who are not aware that behind Israeli bars, we also have 5,200 Palestinian prisoners. Just since October 7th, the Israeli authorities had also arrested and detained more than 1,500 Palestinian prisoners. So the fact that you are still adopting the Israeli narrative automatically by saying how logical it is, you know, as a precondition for those to release the hostages and then we ceasefire. Well, for me as a mother and as an educator and as a professor of diplomacy, in face of all the sufferings and of all the massacres, the documented war crimes that we are witnessing against the women and the children and the deprivation of basic rights, all the humanity should be calling for ceasefire now. Yes, I agree the hostages must be released and no civilian must be put to suffer such atrocities. But ceasefire for humanity in Gaza. The people of Gaza are human beings. This is the message that needs to be conveyed. The million children living in Gaza and the 2.2 million civilians living in Gaza are human beings who should be enjoying equal rights as any other human being. It doesn't make the Israeli civilian or the Israeli human being a better citizen. Let us be more logical, more humanitarian, and more civilized, if I may say, when we speak about the current situation. It is day 26
Okay.
of continued war crimes, of continued rockets that are falling on the heads of the women and the children in Gaza. They don't have any shelter. They don't have any safe place. Even the hospitals are being targeted. The doctors are running operations without anesthesia. They don't have fuel. 50,000 Palestinian women are pregnant in Gaza. 5,000 of them will give birth in the next month. People, women and children are deprived from the basic humanitarian needs in Gaza. It is being converted into a big refugee camp, deprived from the basic hygiene, the basic rights, no water, no food, no medicine, no right to live.
Okay, strong words from you there, ma'am. I appreciate you joining me there from Ramallah. You're giving us a Palestinian perspective to what you believe is a war crime being perpetrated on Gaza refugee camps.